a political ad in my life, but I'm looking ahead to 2022, and I see these words, legitimate political discourse, and I see Michael Fanone being tased with a stun gun, and all I'm thinking is the RNC just handed Democrats a political gift. Why isn't the DNCC going to run an ad in every single district with the words legitimate political discourse over that video and others?
Oh, I think you'll see those ads. I think those ads are coming. But I think it's important to remember here that the fight for control of Congress is not going to be waged in bright red places that Marco Rubio is busy kowtowing to because he still has some fantasy he's going to be president someday. And it's not going to be in bright blue places where everyone is convinced of the seriousness of what Donald Trump did to our democracy with his encouragement of the insurrection and the big lie. It's going to be won or lost in places where there are people that voted for Barack Obama and Donald Trump. Those voters are who the committee needs to focus on communicating with. And those voters are going to be the ones that decide whether Mitch McConnell is going to be in charge of the Senate. The guy who blocked a bipartisan consideration, as Charlie pointed out, of January 6th and all its implications. The only reason this is not even more bipartisan than clearly Liz Cheney and Adam Kinzinger represent is because the Republicans didn't want it to be. They didn't want that kind of investigation. They didn't want that kind of look. So now this committee has to really focus on how they communicate with the voters who are going to decide the midterms and ultimately decide 2024. It's not going to be just by subpoenaing more witnesses or just convincing everyone who's already convinced. They've got to convince some new folks of the seriousness of what happened.
What is the message to those voters that they should be communicating?
Well, it's a couple of things. There is a consistency of message that needs to come about, frankly, about the successes in the economy the Democrats represent. A record number of jobs being created. There needs to be work on the price of groceries and gas. And there needs to be a communication of the seriousness of the evidence around January 6th. And we got to figure out a way to get that information to those voters other than just through the places that folks normally gravitate to because everyone in those places agrees with them.
Charlie, it seems that the Republicans are taking a page out of a different playbook. Axios is reporting on a shadow investigation by House Republicans, in part that reads, House Republicans conducting their own investigation of the January 6th insurrection plan to accuse the Capitol security apparatus of negligence of the highest levels. That is according to Jim Banks, telling Axios that. This is, of course, in line with what Trump has been saying, that he's been blaming Pelosi for security lapses. There's no evidence of that whatsoever. That is absolutely false. Is this just another attempt by Republicans to deflect on what has happened that day? The president calling, and others have called those on that day, faithful protesters exercising their First Amendment rights. They're now saying it's a security lapse by Nancy Pelosi.
Yeah, no, it's a pathetic attempt at projection. I mean, what have they gone through? They've gone through, it was Antifa. Well, no, it was peaceful protesters. It was tourists. Look, none of this is going to change the overall narrative. But can I just comment on what Claire just said? Because I think she makes a very important point. You make an also important point. The Democrats do need to weaponize these comments. Think about the last 2 weeks. Just the words that we've gotten from the GOP. Donald Trump used the term overturn the election. He has dangled pardons for the rioters, the people who attacked those cops. The Republican National Committee refers to that as legitimate political discourse. Those ads, juxtaposed with the images you just showed, are deadly. To basically say, look, this is what Donald Trump is saying. He is promising to pardon them. He is threatening mass unrest if he is held accountable for all of this. He wanted Mike Pence to overturn the election. You know, enough is enough. And that message, if the Democrats don't push that message in every single swing district, then it will be a case of political malpractice.
Betsy, the January 6th Select Committee has been exploring the security lapses. What do we know about that aspect of their investigation and if there's any validity to it?
We know there absolutely were security lapses in the lead up to January 6th. Capitol Police has admitted that there were things that they certainly could have done better, and they've made a whole host of security changes in the wake of the attack to try to make sure that they were much more strongly postured in case something like this happens again. We also know that the U.S. intelligence community really failed in the lead up to January 6th. We know the FBI received intelligence related to the fact that far-right extremists were literally talking in public on social media about breaking into the Capitol building. We know the FBI had these warnings. I've obtained the warnings. I know the FBI got them, but there still wasn't enough security around the Capitol building to keep those people from doing what they publicly said days before they were going to do. And we know that this is a concern that the Select Committee takes seriously. We also know the Select Committee is looking at the failure of the National Guard to reach the Capitol building, to be deployed there for several hours while that demented violent attack was ongoing. What I've reported is that last week, Ryan McCarthy, who was the Army Secretary on the day of the attack, quietly answered questions from Select Committee investigators. A separate memo that I got from a person who was very senior in the D.C. National Guard, that's the person who wrote the memo. That memo has been shared with the Select Committee. That memo that we obtained said that McCarthy, who the committee spoke to, was incommunicado or unreachable for much of the day on January 6th. The point is, what the Select Committee is looking at is really, really expansive. They're looking at a whole basket of topics that are really politically toxic for Republicans, but they're also looking at a bunch of topics that, frankly, aren't necessarily going to help them put political points on the board, because ultimately the project of this Select Committee is not to flip any particular House districts or Senate seats. The project of the Select Committee is to figure out why exactly did the horror and violence of January 6th happen, and what type of laws do members of Congress need to pass to make sure that a horror like that doesn't happen again? Of course, there's no question whatsoever, as we've already seen, that in the process of working on that project, the committee is finding and is likely to find all sorts of stuff that's extremely politically unpleasant for Republicans. But ultimately, that's not the project. The project is figuring out what happened and how to keep it from happening again. And that means the project is a lot wider than I think some people who might realize.
Yeah, and Alex, Congressman Kinzinger probably had this, very eloquent way of this, looking at this line of reasoning to solely focus on the security lapses, which is Republicans' approach to January 6th. It's kind of like looking at or blaming a homeowner for not having a proper security system for a home invasion, as opposed to looking at the criminal and why the criminal attacked that house in the first place. The Democrats are doing the totality of the investigation. Republicans just want to focus on the security lapse and ignore the criminals and the intent behind those that attacked the Capitol on that day.
But isn't that the playbook? I mean, it was established under Trump. When there was a leak with damning information about the administration, the focus was not on the information that was revealed, the damning evidence, but on who leaked it, right? This is the play they run when something politically inconvenient or troublesome arises. Don't focus on the material. Focus on the interlocutor. Focus on the messenger. Focus on all the things that surround the scandal, but not the scandal itself. It's like going after the TSA when a plane is hijacked and not the terrorist, right? But that's exactly what's happening. And I think it's not just because it's a more convenient way of getting around having to address the scandal. It's also because it confuses things. And that's a sort of central strategy of Trumpism. Chum the waters, make it confusing, give people something to cling on to, get their ire focused on Kinzinger or the Capitol Police, just take it off of us. The more you have sort of crossed lines about who the sinners were, who the bad actors were, the easier it is to just throw static in what should be a very clear investigation into, as Betsy says, a horror that unfolded not for the Republican Party or the Democratic Party, but for the country, for the electoral process, for the central pillars of our democracy on January 6th. That has been lost in all of this. And the more we sort of confuse matters, the more Republicans launch shadow investigations and censor people that are just trying to get to the bottom of things, the easier it is to lose sight of that sort of central principle in all of this.
Yeah, obfuscate and gaslight seems the Republican way at this point around January the 6th. Betsy, I want to play for you from my colleague Chuck Todd, a short interview clip from Mark Short. Here's what he had to say about the pressure by Trump and his allies on his boss, the vice president.
I think, unfortunately, the president had many bad advisors who were basically snake oil